I feel like you all don't need an introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. You just sit tight for a little bit. I'm so excited to introduce our guest tonight. First, Ron Rapoport is our moderator. He's an author who collaborated with Tim and Tom on the book, Tim and Tom, An American Comedy in Black and White. He has long covered sports and entertainment for national publications and radio, including a stint as a sports columnist for the Chicago Sun-Times. Please welcome Ron. Tim Reid is an Emmy-nominated actor, writer, producer, and director from Norfolk, Virginia. After college, Reid moved to Chicago, taking a position as one of the first Black marketing representatives with DuPont Corporation. That same year, as part of the Junior Chamber of Commerce of Harvey, Illinois, Reid met Tom Dreesen, a white native of Chicago's South Side. The two partnered to create an anti-drug program for students, which led them to form arguably the first interracial comedic duo, Tim and Tom. From 1971 to 1975, they toured throughout the world, including performances at Mr. Kelly's. Tim then settled in Los Angeles, where he starred in several television series and moved into television and film production. Please welcome Tim. Excuse me. I'm tongue-tied. And last but not least, Tom Dreesen has been in show business for 50 years. Since his early days performing with Tim Reid at Mr. Kelly's and throughout the world, he has made more than 500 solo appearances on national television as a stand-up comedian, including more than 60 on The Tonight Show. He was one of David Letterman's favorite guests and frequently hosted the show in Letterman's absence. Tom has also appeared countless times in Las Vegas, Tahoe, Reno, and Atlantic City alongside such artists as Smokey Robinson, Liza Minnelli, Sammy Davis Jr., and for 13 years, he toured the nation as the opening act for Frank Sinatra. Please welcome Tom. And with that, I'm going to hand the moderating over to Ron, and we'll get started.
Thank you, Allison. Oh, goodness, what a crowd. Tom once told me that when he went to work for Frank Sinatra as his opening act, he quickly realized.
Can you hear him back there, by the way? No, I didn't think so. Sorry. Yeah, right to your mouth. Yeah, right.
Can you hear me now? When he went to work for Frank Sinatra, he quickly realized that he was going to have to deal with the fact that nobody in the audience had come to see him. It's kind of the way I feel tonight, but I'll do my best. Tim and Tom met in Chicago, honed their act in Chicago, played in every place that there could have been in Chicago, and some incredible places, inconceivable places. They worked really hard. They went all
They can't
over.
hear you in the background. They're pointing. They can't hear you. So
What
we're
am I-
going to start all over again because it's a wonderful introduction. Yeah,
How's
put it
this,
up to your
better?
mouth. There you go.
Is
You
this
got to
better?
put it up to your mouth.
Not like this. Like this.
There you go.
Got it. So they met in Chicago, honed their act in Chicago, went to every conceivable venue in Chicago, and some that were inconceivable. And then they finally made the big time after 3 years. And they'll tell you about all the hard times they went through, to Mr. Kelly's. And it was in 1972. Tom has given me the dates here. They appeared 5 times together and once each after the act broke up by themselves. But when they got here, they were a smash hit. I'm going to read you some of the reviews.
Can you hear him in the back? You still can't hear him. I didn't think so.
That's the problem.
Testing.
Either put his mic up or let's cancel the
How's
show
this?
and do it
Is
again
this
some
better?
other time.
Okay. So they finally made Mr. Kelly's, and here are the reviews. Smash hit, Irv Kupson. Talented and delightful, Maggie Daly. Cafe comedy delights of this year, Sam Lesser. I expect you all to know these names, by the way. Bring them back as headliners, Will Leonard. Hilarious routine. This team will be around for a long time. Buck Walmsley. Refreshing humor brought to stage with brilliant style. So they were on their way, and they were able to do much more until finally, after some acrimony, which they'll tell you about, they broke up, and that's when their careers really began. If we're doing the math here, if they started in 1970, they're now in their 6th decade of show business. And believe me when I tell you, they are as busy now as they've ever been. Tim just told me that he's working on an act. He was in television, 36 different shows you think you were on, which might have been a record at that time. It was not uncommon for people to walk down the block and yell out, "Hey, Venus," remembering him from his iconic role as Venus Flytrap in WKRP in Cincinnati. Tom is doing a million things too. He performs so many times in stand-up and corporate gigs, on TV, on motivational speaker he does more charitable work than anybody could possibly know, and they're still doing it. Before I turn it over to them, I haven't told them this, I want to tell you one story that I think sums up each of them. Tim, when he went into writing and directing and producing, was at about the time that television and show business was beginning to realize that they had to do something about the fact that there were so few black and brown faces in front of and behind the camera. At one point, he went to a meeting of a Black Hollywood Trade Association, and one of the leaders of the group said, "Well, everybody here who's been given a job by Tim Reid, please stand up." There were a couple of hundred people there that day, and 40 or 50 of them stood and gave Tim a round of applause. The story about Tom is that he has written a show, a one-man show, that begins with him shining shoes in his uncle's bar in Harvey, Illinois, with Frank Sinatra's voice coming over the jukebox, and ends with Tom carrying Frank's coffin after giving a eulogy at a small church, not a small church, in Beverly Hills, California. So these are the two guys that we're dealing with here. One of the things that they don't do much is appear together. Tim lives in the East Coast, Tom is on the West Coast. They're terribly busy. So this is a special night, and I'm really glad that they're here. The year that I spent working with them on the book was as much fun as I could have, and you're about to find out now. You guys, go ahead.
Well, our time is up now, but thank you very much. We do this. We've done this several times, and we can go on and on. But we'll try to make it simple. Ron told the story. We started out in show business in 1969. I had written a drug education program teaching grade school children the ills of drug abuse with humor, a concept I had. We were in the JCs, a civic group. Tim graduated from Norfolk State College. DuPont recruited him into Chicago and to be a marketing rep for DuPont. And he saw an ad in the paper about JCs looking for young men of action. JCs in those days attacked the problems of the community. Any problem in the community, the JCs went out and worked on that problem. And through that, we learned leadership training program. We learned how to serve on a committee, chair a committee, Robert's Rules of Order, how to conduct meetings. And at that very first meeting that I was asking the JCs to sanction the idea that I had, Tim comes up to me afterward and said, I really like that idea. I'm a new member. I just joined. I'd like to work with you on that project. I'm going to digress for just for a second. I honestly was going through a crisis in my life at that time. I had a wife and 3 kids. I was going from job to job. Nothing satisfied me. And I was honestly praying, saying, God, what is it I'm supposed to be doing? This can't be it. Anyhow, so when Tim came up to me and said, I'd like to help you with that project, I said, I'm sorry, I already have a guy, a white friend of mine named John DeBoer, was going to work with me on it. The next day, as prayers are answered, John DeBoer called me and said, I can't do that project with you. I got a new job. I said, gee, what was that guy's name? Oh, yeah, Tim Reid. We get together, we rehearsed it, we worked on the project, and the program became #1 in 50 states and in 22 foreign countries. Wherever the JC publications were, they had articles about how to teach drug education at an 8th grade level. They weren't teaching drug education at a college or a high school level in those days, let alone at an elementary school level. We go into the classrooms, we got the kids laughing, playing music, and so forth and so on, and getting the kids laughing, and the program was a success. One day at St. John's grade school in Harvey, a young girl named Vicky Sarufka comes up and says, you guys are very funny. You ought to become a comedy team. She said, you guys, and the thought of a black-white comedy team intrigued us, and that was the beginning. And Vicky Sarufka sitting in the audience right there. Her name is Vicky Waddy. Stand up, Vicky. It was, and anyhow, and that's it. And so we became America's first black and white comedy team. I'll turn it over to Tim.
So that's how you get into show business. Find Vicky. Who knew? Life has been and still is a series of universal happenings that have brought me so many, many miles in my life and my career. You just never know. As people have always said, you just got to keep moving forward towards something, and believe me, things will happen. The irony of me coming to Chicago was, again, a little irony in that. There's always a story behind the story. As it was said, I was the first black hired by E.I. DuPont in management. They had blacks working in factories, but nobody in a management level. And so they didn't know what to do with me because most of the DuPont plants were in rural and different places, North Carolina and other places. They said, well, where are we going to send this kid once we put him out in the field? So some of them said, well, let's see, we have plants in Detroit. And they went, no, those union workers will beat him up. We can't send him to Detroit. Somebody said, well, let's send him to California. And somebody said, no, you send him to California, he'll go into show business. True story. So they sent him to Chicago. So they sent me to Chicago, where thanks to Chicago, I went into show business.
It was interesting because in those days there were no comedy clubs in America. There weren't any comedy clubs in America. Today there's 550. There's 3 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. But when we started out, there was no place to be bad. And also, we had to work nightclubs. So today, young comedians say, I'm going to become a comedian, and they write 3 minutes of material, and they go to an open mic club somewhere, and they get up and try that 3 minutes out. We had to write a nightclub act. If we were going to be in show business, we had to write a nightclub act. So, and again...
Well, we did what any comedy did. We stole most of the first few things we said.
Yeah, anything and everything was funny. But it was a struggle to sit down. We had a friend named Dickie Owings who tried to help us. We would sit and brainstorm all the time, Yeah. Now, Tim's former wife, Rita, was very supportive of us and said, you know, if this is what my husband wants to do, we're going to do it. My ex-wife, I can't remember her name. Oh, yeah, Plaintiff. No, you know, God rest her soul. She's not dead. I just wish God would rest her soul. I'm gonna do my act here, but anyhow. So she was not supportive. She was right. My ex-wife was right. Her father worked in a factory in Harvey, Illinois, for 40 years, and it brought a check home every Friday. And that's the man she married. I was that guy that would bring the check home every Friday. And now you're going to go into show business, a precarious thing like that, a black-white comedy team. No one's ever done that before. Are you crazy? Are you insane? You know, so that was, and so Tim and I had to sit down and figure out how to get it an act. So we'd go to his house in Markham. He was living in Markham, and every 5 minutes we'd run in and say to his wife, "Rita, is this funny? Do you think this is funny?" I went after about 2 months of this. I went over to the house and Rita said, "Tom, you cannot come over here anymore. You can't. You got to go someplace and do this. You're driving me crazy, you know." And Tim found a place called the Party Mart Supper Club.
Party Mart Supper Club.
And we went there first. And all we wanted to do, we asked the guy, when the jazz group gets off stage, could we get on stage and do this material? He said, well, yeah, sure. So now we go there. We'd never been on stage before. We're in the kitchen waiting to go on as you know, and ready to throw up every 5 seconds. And the guy
did throw up just before we went out. That little basket they kept dumping stuff into, and I'm standing there looking at that. Yeah.
So we got the guy said, what's the name of your act? And we said, Reid and Dreesen. He said, Dreesen and Rude. We said, no, just say Tim and Tom. And so that became very, and we run out on stage, and all we wanted to do was remember our material. That's all we wanted to do. So we got on stage, and this is what it sounded like. Hi, we're the comedy team of Tim Tom. I'm Tim, he's Tim Tom. We just came in from we drove our way. We rushed off the stage after about 8 minutes. We got the owner in the corner and said, how did we do? He said, I don't know. You never gave me a chance to laugh. He said, come back tomorrow and slow down. And we did, and the next night we got some laughs, and that was the beginning of Tim and Tom from there. But then we went to the Golden Horseshoe, but you can...
Yeah, as he said, there weren't many places to work, especially for novice, people who had never really done it before. And we found this club down in East Chicago Heights. What's it called?
It's in, yeah, Chicago, called
Yeah.
the Golden Horseshoe. Yeah.
Golden Horseshoe. And it was run by a gentleman who was very outgoing, to say the least. And he had an organ in this little club,
Hammond organ, yeah.
Hammond organ, about 10 feet wide walls and maybe 20 feet long. It's like being on a boxcar. And he had a huge, huge organ, pipe organ. So when he put that thing on, everybody in the neighborhood said, "Oh, show started." And he introduced us, and we went out, and we were a little better. We slowed down, but we bought powder blue tux. Remember, we had little powder blue tux? And it was a place where all of the junior gangsters, not the big gangsters, they stayed up in Chicago on Rush Street. But the little junior gangsters would hang out down at the Golden Horseshoe because it was near the track. Was it Washington Park, was it? What was
Yeah,
that?
Washington.
Yeah. So they sit there, and out we come. And we learned something that night, that comedy can be very violent. Because a guy put a cigarette out in my face. And a fight, Tom came to my aid, and a battle came on, and it was quite an introduction to comedy and getting paid for. I think we got $30, $35. Then we split.
We got $30 for 6 shows. We got $30, $15 a piece. But it was our first paying gig.
Yeah, first paying gig. And I say that to say, we were talking earlier today about just reminiscing a bit about this place, Chicago, Mr. Kelly's. And we thought, what kept us coming back? Why did we go back to the Golden Horseshoe? But we went back the following weekend. Of course, we had alerted some of our friends, and everybody was carrying guns.
The interesting thing about that was, that in those days, you didn't see a black guy and a white guy walking down the street together, let alone go on a stage together. This guy was a racist, put a lit cigarette on Tim's face, tried to beat the bejesus out of me. I boxed when I was in the service, but he outweighed me by 100 pounds. It was a brawl. And I'll never forget that night, a couple guys jumped over the bar, some Italian friends of mine from the Heights, and they subdued the guy. It's a long story. But anyhow, we get in the car, and that was our 4th time on stage. And Tim looked at me and he said, "Welcome to show business." So bless her. But the interesting thing in those days, you got to go back to 1969, for those of you who can, most of you can't, but America was in turmoil. There were African Americans who were rioting in almost every major city in the country, feeling disenfranchised from the system. Harvey, Illinois had one of the biggest riots in the country in the neighborhood I grew up in. Students were protesting the Vietnam War all over America. Martin Luther King had been the Civil Rights Act was passed in '64. This was 5 years later, '69. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. America was in turmoil. And we thought, well, this would be a good time to become a black-white comedy team. But when we worked all black clubs in the North and the South. But if there was a white guy, a redneck, who hated black people, hated them with a passion, he wasn't mad at Tim. He was mad at me for being with Tim. If we worked a black club where a black guy hated white people with a passion, he wasn't mad at me. He was mad at Tim for being with me. See, because what we represented getting along. We represented balance. We didn't go to preach. We went to make people laugh. We weren't preaching. Anywhere there was racial tension, we performed. We did 11 prisons in 1 year. We did the county jail in Chicago 3 times. We went to high schools, colleges. Anywhere there was racial tension, we went there. Again, just doing comedy. Because all over America, guess what they were saying? Guess what they're saying in 1969? You know what we need in America? We need better race relations. You know what they're saying today in 2024? You know what we need in America? We need better race relations.
In terms of race relations, there are some oddities that we both shared and similarities. We both came up in a hard way. We both came from poor beginnings, to say the least. My family was so poor, we only had 2 words, P.O. We were just po. And tough beginnings. And so I really had never had a white friend in my entire life when I moved here to Chicago. And again, I moved the weekend that Dr. King was killed. And so race relations was really not in my mind at that time. I had been very active in SNCC and president of a few civil rights organizations in Norfolk, Virginia, the South where I grew up, in Colored Town. Tom, and I don't know why till this day I think back, what was it? What was it? Was it the meeting? Was it discussing? I think sitting around the table at my house talking about it, I saw something in him that was very familiar. I knew this guy. I didn't know him as a white guy, but I knew him as a guy. His life, his turns, his difficulties were so similar to mine that he became my first white friend in my entire life. I never spoke socially to white people. This is all through college. First time I had a social conversation with a white person was during the civil rights activity when one of them from Old Dominion decided to come and join us because we needed some cover. They had been sicking dogs on us. So one of the white kids said, I'll come and join you guys. I said, great, you're in front. And that was it. And so meeting him for me was, and coming to a place like Chicago from the South, was a unique thing. And I was as intrigued about where we were going to go with this thing as I was in anything else. It was, as he said, I use the word context a lot. That's been forgotten in schools now. They don't teach people context of situations. They just give you the highlights. But the context of the world at that time, for him and I to become a comedy team, the first and still the only one that spent any time doing this, and traveling this country and facing the things that we faced, only the universe could do that. And the blessings were that we have come to this point where we've had successful careers thanks to places like Mr. Kelly's that we dreamed about for years. Boy, one day we're gonna get into Mr. Kelly's. If you wanted to be a celebrity, if you wanted to be in show business, I don't care if you were a singer, a dancer, a musician, the thing was, you gotta get to Mr. Kelly's. That's the only way that's gonna happen. I don't know of anyone that had a career from this point backwards that didn't, at some point in their career, you name a name, and you'll see their picture, and they performed here at Mr. Kelly's. So that's why I'm here to kind of give my respects to a place and a partner and a writer who was able to put it all down into words. So that's why I'm here.
Yeah. Yeah, the first time we came off stage in Golden Horseshoe, and the first time we got laughs and that we felt like we could do this, we dreamed of going to Mr. Kelly's, and Mr. Kelly's was 45 minutes away, and it took us 3 years to get there. But I just want to say one more thing about, again, race relations, that Tim Reid and I were not preachers, we were comedians, and we were having a race relation that America wasn't having. We would go on a stage every night and try to make people laugh. We didn't try to preach them, we just wanted to make them laugh. And the interesting thing, people always think that the comedian is the communicator, but the audiences are the communicators, because if they laugh at what we say, they're all just communicated with one another. Just that instant, and if they groan at what we say, we also, they all communicated, they didn't like that. So they were communicating, we were getting them, not knowing, but we were getting them to communicate, and again, and then I'll get to Mr. Kelly's. Something that I'll take to my grave. It happened time and time and time again. We would do a show somewhere at a college, somewhere where there was racial tension, and a young black kid would come up to us and say, I have a white friend I'd like to reach out to, but if I do, the brother's going to wear me out. But after watching you and Tim tonight, I'm going to reach out to my white friend. Then a white kid would come up and say, I have a black friend that I really like, and the white guy's going to call me names. But after watching you and Tim, I'm going to reach out to my black friend. That happened to us more than you'll ever know. I care more about that than anything that we ever accomplish in our business. That's the truth. Because the effort it took, because it seemed like at times the whole world was against us. And we were, we started writing funny stuff. We got on the Playboy circuit. We were doing 6 shows a night, and our act got tight. Those are reviews that Ron read, because we were ready when we went to Mr. Kelly's. But it was the Playboy circuit was the last vaudeville in America. There were 17 Playboy clubs in America and 2 resorts, Great Gorge and Lake Geneva. Tim and I worked all those clubs around the country, 6 shows a night. At one time, Sam Lessner from the Daily News one time said, the comedy team of Tim and Tom is like watching a masterful ping pong match. Boom, boom. We didn't have that in the beginning, but through trial and error, and we wouldn't give up. And there were times we should have given up. Bertram Russell once said, there are people in show business who become major stars simply because they didn't have sense enough to quit when they should have.
And we didn't listen. My father, before he passed away, came up to for the visit, because I had my first house. I was living in the projects till I got to Chicago and I bought my first house. I'm gonna piss you off by telling them how much I paid for it. $15,300. See, I told you to be mad. But he looked at us. We were performing at the High Chaparral. A few brothers and sisters will know that place. But that was on the south side. And again, we were happy to be there. We opened for the Dells. And my father came to see the show. And it was a decent show. It wasn't a great show. We hadn't been to Kelly's. And I remember him looking at me. He says, son, don't give up your day job. I will never forget that. I wish he had lived to see at least one successful show.
By the way,
he never saw us in
think
any
about
success.
that. We worked. There weren't any comedy clubs, so we worked what they affectionately called the Chitlin Circuit, black-owned, black-operated nightclubs. We worked the High Chaparral in Chicago, the Burning Spear, the Cotton Club, the Dating Club Lounge. We worked all the black clubs here. We worked the 20 Grand in Detroit. That was 20 Grand. Motown was in Detroit in those days. We worked there. We worked the Sugar Shack in Boston, the Club Harlem in Atlantic City before they had gambling. It was on Kentucky Avenue. And the interesting thing, the Club Harlem, it was on the Chitlin Circuit, was the apex. When you got to the Club Harlem, you would arrive. That was the Mr. Kelly's of the Chitlin Circuit. The first show, and all the nightclubs you worked at in America, even at Mr. Kelly's, you'd open on a Monday, close on a Saturday. At the Club Harlem, you opened on Saturday night, you closed on the following Friday. But Saturday night, first show was 10 o'clock at night. Second show was 2 o'clock in the morning. The third show was 6 a.m. called The Breakfast Show. You know, The Breakfast Show. And all the waiters and the waitresses and all the night people would come to the Club Harlem, about 1,100 people, and also all the pimps and all the hoes, but all the pimps and all the hoes from Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Newark, New Jersey, Philadelphia. The pimps brought the hoes down. If they had 10 girls in their, they called it the barn. If they had 10 girls in their
Stable,
barn,
it was not
the
barn.
3 top money makers of the weekend got to go to the Club Harlem, you know. And what the deal was, they paid Pop Williams, the owner of the club, like $500 to sit down front back in those days. And so they would come in late. So now the place would be packed, but then the pimp would come in from Newark or something with his ladies, and people, ooh, and they'd come down front. Now,
There's so many rhinestones, you had to wear sunglasses.
I want to tell you our opening, because this is one of the funniest parts of our life. The show was Mama Lou Parks and her dancers, a heavyset black woman who had like 10 kids. They would dance the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and get the show rocking. Mama Lou Parks and her dancers. Then it was a male singing group. Then it was a female singing group. Then it'd be comedy. And then the headline would be Ronnie Dyson or Smokey Robinson or anybody who was Temptations, OJs. But the fourth thing was comedy. And so what we did, we had the MC. The MC would go out and when it's time for the MC. Are y'all ready for some comedy? You ready for it? Come on, you got ready for it? I'll applaud. We got a comedy team here. This team came from Chicago. And this comedy team, and he kept saying team, this comedy team has never been here before, so it's the comedy team's first time here at Atlantic City. Will you welcome the comedy team of Tim and Tom? And Tim went out by himself. And he'd go out there and he'd say, we're really happy to be here. You know, we just got in last week, and we really like it. Pretty soon the audience go, we? I don't see any we, I see he.
You know, black people talk back to the audience.
Oh, yeah.
It's a co-show. You're working with them.
I start coming out stage left now, and the spotlight hits me, and I'm walking out stage, and you hear, ooh, what do we got here? What the hell we got? Now I'm working my way, and I'm looking in the audience, and Tim's in the center stage. I finally worked my way to center stage. Tim said, where you been, man? I said, I don't see any of my people out there. Tim said, no, I don't see any of your people out there. I said, well, we better be funny. He said, what do you mean we, white man? You know. that opened the show, and then we got him, But again, all of our stuff wasn't about race. We did routines about all sorts of things. It was just this relationship that we were having. And Dean Martin, Jerry Lewis told me something many years later, because I was always interested in comedy teams. Later, when I was alone and I was working at Riviera in Las Vegas, Jerry came to my dressing room and I was bugging him about Dean Martin. What was it like, you and Dean? And he said, Tommy, he said, when we started out, we didn't have good material. We just liked one another, and the audience sensed that. This Jewish guy and this Catholic kid liked one another. He said, we had jokes like, did you take a bath today? No, why? Is one missing? We had jokes. He said, it was the love that we had for one another, that they recognized that in us, and they recognized it when it wasn't there later on, And I think that's what people saw. Tim and I, we had material, and we kept getting it better and better. But in the beginning, we were friends. We really were friends. And it wasn't I tell you what wasn't an act. Our friendship wasn't an act. Our friendship was real, and they sensed that,
And it was a kind of friendship that was, again, going back to the context of the time, it wasn't like a typical friendship. Boy, did we fight. I think what makes a friendship work, whether it's a marriage or a business, is the respect. Not only did I respect him because I knew his childhood, I had one just like it. It was just in a different place. And I knew he was someone I'd go to war with because he would fight. He showed that the first night somebody put a cigarette in my mouth. Before I could hit the guy, he had swung at the guy and missed and hit the owner of the club. But never mind. So I knew he was cross-sighted. But I saw that. I said, this guy will go to war with me, and he will cover, and I'm going to cover him. And I think starting with that, no matter what happened to us, and God knows we were in some very dangerous and protected each other. One night we were coming from, in Missouri, coming from a prison or something we had worked.
Kirkwood, Missouri, you're talking about the showcase? You're talking about
We went in the club, went in this wayside diner where
Jim's
you
Cafe.
find, as they must have painted their necks, rednecks. And outside with these motorcycles and pickup, but we're hungry. We're driving, got to drive back to Chicago. It's 1 o'clock in the morning.
It was called Jim's Cafe.
James, is that what it was? Okay.
When we walk in there, there's all these rednecks with the Caterpillar hats and John Deere hats and long sideburns, and we sit down and well, look at we got here. Now they're saying it loud enough, so look, we got here. Wish I had my sheep shears. I'd cut that long hair.
But no, first thing you say, he looks at me and said, now calm down. Don't just be cool. I had somewhat of a temper. I've tempered that down now. But anyway, he said, be cool. I said, all right, but I ain't going down like this. I'm looking for weapons. There are no weapons. They gave you plastic forks. I mean, but they keep getting louder and more directed towards us. And go ahead.
And then so finally I said to Tim, Tim, do me a favor. He said, don't start no shit now. I said, Tim, do me a favor. Go get the car, get it started, get it right by the front door. I said, I'll take care of the check. He said, I said, no, please do that. He said, Tim said, okay. Tim goes in his car. Now he's out in front with the engine running. Now they had gravel all over the Jim's Cafe, had gravel over there. So now I can't repeat what these guys said because it's so crude, but I was paying the check and the guy said to me, hey, you're going to go with your black friend, and went on to tell me what he thought I was, what Tim and I were going to do to each other. It was very sexual, but anyhow. And finally, I paid the check, and I got to the door, and I said, I hope you guys will sometimes come back to leave here and go to the south side of Chicago. I'd like to introduce you to some friends of ours back there that would beat the shit out of you, chicken shit, no good hillbilly. And anyhow, and then I went to the door, and they got up from the thing, and I got in the car. I said, Tim, take off. He said, what'd you do? I said, take off. They ran out the door, and Tim took, and all that gravel was like machine gun bullets. Go, blah, 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 blah.
We knocked over a few motorcycles.
And then the top it up, now that's bad enough. We had to find a place to sleep. We went to and this happened to us all the time. He had a wife and 2 kids. I had a wife and 3 kids. We couldn't get 2 rooms. We couldn't afford 2 rooms. We always had to get 1 room. Now, back in the day, we go to this little hillbilly motel. ding, 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 a little raggedy hotel. The guy finally comes out. He's wiping his sleep out of his eye. Yeah. We said, want to get a room for tonight. You want 2 rooms? No, we want 1 room. He goes, oh. He said, did you want a king-size bed, or would you like one of them queen-size beds? Tim said, the guy thought we were gay. Tim thought, as long as they think we're gay, we're mean gay. Tim said, give us a room before we break your neck. All right. Anyhow, I said, that was just one night in the years of Tim and Tom sticking it out, hanging in there, But again, we Mr. Kelly's, when we finally got here, we should get to that. I think that's what we all came here to talk about.
The one story I hope you won't get away, which is Tim's first experience at Mr. Kelly.
Oh, yeah.
Before you went into showbiz.
Can you folks hear us in the back? That's what I'm really
Yeah.
You can, okay.
As I said, I believe in the universal power. You can call it whatever you want, but I believe in it. And it has never, ever left me without amazement and some of the things that it has gone. So New Year's Eve, 68. I didn't really know Tom at that time, I don't think. No, didn't know Tom. I look in the paper and I see Richard Pryor performing at this place called Mr. Kelly's. Never heard of Mr. Kelly's. I hadn't even been to Rush Street. I've only been in this city for about 5 or 6 months. So I told my wife, Rita, Mr. Kelly's. Well, I loved Mr. Kelly's. I only seen one of the Ed Sullivan show, and he was like, oh, I gotta go see Mr. Kelly's. It's New Year's Eve. I said, we're going down to Mr. Kelly's. It was 9 degrees below zero. And I hated the cold. Matter of fact, I'd probably be living here if you would tow it down to the Bahamas. So we jump in my car at about 8 o'clock, and we drive down to Rush Street looking for a parking place on New Year's Eve. We circle the block and finally, right across from Mr. Kelly's, somebody comes out with a sign, flipped it because it said full, and a car pulled out. As I walked, I drove right into it. He said, one place, geez, okay, boom. And I see this line, 9 degrees 00, around the block to get to the entrance, waiting for the second show. The first show is now in act. So I said, I'm not standing out here in this cold and 9 degrees in no line. So we walked up to the front entrance. This is a true story. I don't know. I've never been in a nightclub in my life. So the door opened, the one that everybody's waiting for, the revolving door. The door opens where you come out. Well, someone had stepped out. It was near the end of the show. And when they stepped out, I grabbed the door and go in. And what was it? Monroe, tough guy. He looked at me. He's like,
He was Major D, right?
Major D. He said, hey, what? Did you not? I mean, he's so angry, he can't even speak. I said, what? He said, it's a line. What do you want? I said, I'd like 2 tickets to see Richard Pryor. He said, what? Tickets? Do you know people? And he's yelling at it, veins popping in his neck. People have been planning this for months, years, and you think you can get it on New Year's Eve? You know where you are? Where are you from? I said, I'm from Virginia. He said, oh, no wonder. Let me tell you something. I'm going to teach you something you will never forget. You stand right there. So now we're standing in the warmth, people outside, and they let out the first show. Well, now, if you've been to Kelly's at that time, it was crowded. So for us the people couldn't get out. They get to the coat rack and get their stuff. They can't get out because I'm standing there. So he says, hey, move over there. So we move over, and everybody goes out. Everybody. Empties the room. He looks at me, and he started to come over, and somebody bangs on the door. Now, remember, 9 degrees. He said, all right, stay right there. And he lets all these people in, walking by me. We're watching them all come in. So finally, when he gets them all in and seated, now we're about an hour into this event. He looks at me, and it starts over to me. 2 people come rushing out of the restaurant, just rushing. And she's pissed off with her husband, I guess, or lover, whoever it was. They fight. And she said, I'll never do that. I'm going with you anywhere else. And he's like this and da-da-da. And they burst out. She throws her something at him, and she leaves. And Monroe says to the guy, are you coming back? He said, I don't think so. Monroe looks at us and says, take the 2 chairs at the bar. We go sit at the bar. That's where you do it. And out comes Richard Pryor and does a performance I'll never forget in my life. He was just, and if you see the film, you'll know why Richard was so attached to the club and the people who owned it, for many reasons. So he came back because he was playing the week that Dr. King was killed. And so he left. He didn't finish the gig, and nothing was happening in this city. So he came back, and I watched him perform. And I looked at my wife after he walked off stage, New Year's Eve, and I said, I want to do that. I want to do it on that stage on New Year's Eve. 5 years later, I think it was 5, the club was closing down, and I was the last comic to work on Mr. Kelly's stage on New Year's Eve. The universe.
We appeared as a comedy team at Mr. Kelly's, I think 5 times. I know we opened for Della Reese, we opened for Muddy Waters, we opened for different artists. A couple times there was cancellations at the last minute. And we had a lot of good shows there, a lot of good shows and a lot of good times. But like a lot of comedy teams, there were creative differences sometimes. And Tim and I would get into arguments sometimes, but not about race. It wasn't about race. We argue creative arguments. But one particular night, I'll never forget this night, Tim and I got into a heated argument before the second show. And it was a heated argument, and we were going back and forth at one another, and neither one was going to back down and back and forth, and finally getting so mad, and it was really angry, and we hear, 5 minutes, and leave us alone, and we're arguing, and but pretty soon 2 minutes, now we're still arguing, and now it's time to go on stage, and the woman said, you guys are on stage, and we were so angry at one another, we couldn't look at one another. And they introduced us, we went on stage, and we did the greatest performance that we ever did in our entire life. I swear to you, the energy, we were bang, bang, we were hitting our bang, bang, bang. Now, the crowd they were cheering, and we came off stage, and Tim said, we got to start arguing before every show. But it was something, the energy we took to the stage, we generated it into the comedy. And not knowing, no one ever told us to do this, it just was one of those things that happened. It's another night I'll never forget. But again, what we were doing, just people weren't doing that in America, and I always I swear to God, I could tell you 100 stories. They're in the book about some real hardships that we were having. Tim and I were sitting together this afternoon saying, "How in the world?" As Tim pointed out, why didn't we quit? Why did we keep going back? What was it? What was it that made us stay together? And I believe it was our friendship was one thing, and I think the other is that we knew in some small way we were making a difference. We really were making a difference, especially when we got around high school kids or college kids, and even in adults. That we were having a relationship America wasn't having. And that's that simple. It's that simple. I don't mean you sit down and discuss race with every person of another color. It's just you just discuss the weather, but you were having a relationship that America wasn't having. And Mr. Kelly's was the epitome. When we made it there, we knew we were good enough to make it anywhere. The team broke up later, and that's in the book. Why? As to why we both have different reasons why. And I was crushed. I had never been on stage alone. I thought Tim and Tom would be the greatest comedy team, or that was my dream, that we'd be the greatest comedy team of all time. I was really crushed, but however, today we look back over our lives and realize that had to happen. We had to start out together. We had to give each other the courage to do it, to go on, but we both went on to our own successes, and that had to happen, that we had to break up. But everything I own, everything I have, every success that I have in my life is because I met this man. And I'm sure he feels the same way, that everything is because I met him. My whole life changed,
We got to go to questions now. I think we've proven here that he who moderates least moderates best.
By the way, what is your name? Speak into the mic, will you? I can't.
Before you get that,
Yeah.
Hold up, Ron.
Yeah.
Ron, when we decided, when Tom convinced me, I was not really.
Can I tell that story?
Yeah.
I said to Tim for years, we were both going that way. I said, Tim, we should write a book. Oh, no. Tom, they weren't interested in this then. They ain't going to be interested in this now. I said, Tim, we got to write a book. No. And I'd call him. He'd be in Virginia. And I'd say, let's talk about writing. I don't want to write a book. Tom, I went to see a movie called Remember the Titans. You remember that movie, that football movie? In that movie, I'm watching the movie, and this white kid football player got injured and was now paralyzed for life. He's in the hospital. His black friend was rushing to see him, and the nurse said, son, you can't go in there. That's only for family. And the white kid said, nurse, what's wrong with you? Can't you see he's my brother? The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I said, I went outside. I got Tim on the phone. I had a cell phone. I said, Tim, they're doing our story. That's our story that they're doing. He said, all right, let's write the book. And then go ahead.
And then he told me about someone he wanted to do it, and I said, all right, we'll go out. We'll go out and talk. And we spent several weeks with this man. And
Imagine what it was like listening to these guys, and they're doing it just for me. It's an act for one, as you probably learned.
Put your phone.
These guys are doing their act wherever they go. I mean, it was one of the most thrilling things. I've been places. I've been a writer. I've done lots of stuff. It's still one of the most exciting things I've ever done. Here's a pretty good question, I think. Why do you think there are so few contemporary comedy duos?
why is America dealing with race relations at this time?
Well, in defense of that, I say that too. There's never been another black and white comedy team. A couple of people tried it after Tim and I started, and they didn't. And when we finished, we were still the only black and white comedy team in America. But for one thing, I just don't think America's ready for it, or if they are, the right two guys. I've always believed we were the right two guys to do this. Yeah. But also, there aren't any comedy teams anymore. You rarely see any comedy teams, let alone a black-white comedy team. But it's because there isn't enough money, in these comedy clubs around the country to be a comedy team.
I think, but we got to add the context of race. You see, we've all been conditioned. Race is a money maker. It's one of the most profitable things you can fight for or against. They're making money today. News teams, CNN, NBC, all of them, they make money. Race is a very powerful thing that's been fed to us. So we all have our conditioning. And as I said, this is the first white person I ever had any social contact with. Never worked for one, didn't care too much for them. And something about when you come together, it's like two people in the military, white, black, age, doesn't matter. You get in that foxhole, you get in those trenches, and bullets are flying over your head, and you have to protect one another. And you know that this could be the end. There's something that happens that you go, we're together, we're in this. When that's over, you don't lose that. And for the 5 or 6 years that we spent out on the road, danger, all kinds of things, success, failures, you can't let that go. That gets beyond race. That becomes human. That becomes the context of life. And it's a little harder now. Would I join a black and white comedy team right now? Hell no. Because it's a lot of reasons that people aren't doing it. It's hard. You face personal things. You face situations where it's all raw. It's out. It's real. And you have to deal with it. We did that. We did that on a racial situation, whether it's money, banking, businesses. But when you have to face the reality of life and you can get through that, there's a respect that grows. I go back to the respect. Forget about color of skin. It's life. It's the battle that we faced. Most people don't want to do that. Married people don't want to do that. How long are marriages last? Hour and a half? Well, I mean, come on.
And then Tim points out that there are people who make a lot of money keeping us divided. The oldest game in the business is divide and conquer. As long as they keep us fighting down here, we're all, at some point you have to look back and laugh and say, we're all being played, we are all being played. And I think Tim and I...
They're going to Mars. They're getting ready for it. You know that.
Here's another one. Did you play off each other? What's a joke you performed? I'm thinking of the joke you worked up in Detroit that time.
Say that again. What was the question?
Oh, tell the story.
The joke in Detroit.
I told you that's racist.
That you talked to.
Oh,
I love this story.
not.
No. The one where, you know how hard they are to train.
Oh, I know. Oh, yeah.
I love this
It was in Detroit at the 20 grand. We were sitting around writing comedy. Again, we were novices. We didn't know. We weren't comedy writers, but we were trying to write comedy. And Tim and I were sitting around. We were trying to write this routine. And we were in the business maybe a little over a year. And I said, Tim, I got an idea. If we ever get a heckler and he's heckling you, I'm going to jump up. If it's a guy heckling you, I'm going to jump up and say, a white guy heckling you, I'm going to say, hey, buddy, leave him alone. He's mine. Go get your own. After all, you know how hard they are to train. Now, Tim said to me, oh, Tom, that's a bit racist. I said, oh, Tim, I didn't mean, no, Tom, we're writing material. You got that creative juices. They got to come out of your head. Don't stifle that. But it's a bit racist. I said, but Tim, he said, Tom, I know you're not a racist. I know you're not, but it sounds racist, Tom. So I said, okay, I'm sorry. No, don't apologize. Just keep writing. That night, swear to God, we go on stage at the 20 grand, 2 o'clock in the morning, only like 12 guys in the audience, 12 black guys in the audience. And ladies and gentlemen, Tim and Tom, we walk out on stage, and a black guy in the back said, hey, white boy, what the hell are you doing in this neighborhood? And Tim jumped up and he said, hold it, brother, leave him alone. He's mine. Go get your own. After all, you know how hard they are to train.
That's called context. Context. And that was the thing that we learned and what I think young comics don't want to learn. That is the context. It didn't work with him. We've been too conditioned for that. You'll either laugh quietly or you'll go, oh, that's so racist. And it is racist. But it's funnier coming from a black guy.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, I always say a pie in the face of a banker is funny. A pie in the face of a homeless man is not. You know, when the audience is in the majority and the minority, who's the majority, who's the minority? You know, and there are no victims. When you're writing a joke, if you dissect comedy, it gets boring. But comedy is two things. Number one, it's 9/10 surprise. The audience laughs because they didn't think you were going to say that. So the setup line has to hide the punchline. And the other rule is there are no victimless jokes. Who's the victim in this joke? Me, society, the government, the airlines, you know, Tim, me. We played off of one another. There was no straight men, funny men in our act. We were both straight and funny to each other. We'd play off of one another that way. So there wasn't, you know.
What was the time we played, he calls me, he was more booking, he was always booking places. God knows the place he drug me into. He calls me and says, we're going to play a Polish convention up in near place. I went, what?
Now, if you remember, you old timers remember Sig Sagowitz? His son is I think he's the priest at Holy Name Cathedral. Is he Holy Name? Yeah. Now, Sig Sagowitz had a radio show in his office or something, and he was the first guy who ever put us on radio. He interviewed Tim and I, and now he decides, we're in the business maybe 5 or 6 months. They have they were inducting Yankovic, I wish I think it was, anyhow, into the Polka Hall of Fame. and it was all Polish people. And anyhow, so, and prior to that, in one of the neighborhoods, a black guy was killed.
Literally, a week before that. He just had a flat tire. And they went, you can't have that flat tire here, and they killed him.
So now we go on stage that night, but just for now, it's like 1,000, maybe 1,200 Polish people. And I had grown up with some Polish kids in Harvey named Shuntek, Tommy Switek. And I said, Tim, here's what you do. We come out there and I'll say, I'm sorry we're late. We stopped on the south side of Chicago for some soul food. First of all, when we walked on stage, you know, you could hear a pin drop. You know, I said, I'm sorry we're a little bit late. We stopped on the south side of Chicago for some soul food. And Tim said, yeah, chanina, gołąbki, pierogi, kielbasa. And the room erupted into laughter that a black guy would know what chanina, kielbasa, you know. And we had them from that time on. And I still have the letter that Sig wrote us. I've got it in my scrapbook that Sig wrote us afterward. It was just another opportunity to take our relationship and get people laughing. Again, we had them communicating with one another, you know. So no one was the butt of the joke, you know. But what we did do, Tim would tell me about things they say about white folks, black folks say about, and I would tell him things about white folks say about black folks, and we turned that into something funny, you know. On the other hand, we did a lot of routines that had nothing to do with race at all, you know. But it was just two guys on stage having a good time. I'm sorry. Ron.
The thing I love about Q&A, it's the best part of the evening, although maybe not tonight.
Will you put the microphone up to your mouth?
But
I'm not going to give you this one.
I'm glad this is almost over because I'll master this by then. Anyway, I always wonder whether this is going to be a question I was not prepared for. Look at the picture behind you. Look at the picture behind you.
Yeah.
And tell me why you're laughing. What has Tim said to you?
Well, let me tell you something very interesting. I always wanted our book to be called Before Our Time because everybody who ever knew about us or read about us, even David Letterman, my friend, when he read the first manuscript to our book, he said, you guys are before your time. Everybody said you're before your time. In 1971, Tim Reid and I on stage at Mr. Kelly's, and we used to do a routine about the first black president of the United States. And I would interview Tim being the first black president of the United States. And so were we before our time? One of the lines was, I said, what are you going to do when you become president of the United States? He said, first thing I'm going to ask the Congress to enact a law that, enact a law that dead people are not allowed to vote in Chicago. He said, then I'm going to invoke a law that live people aren't allowed to vote in Mississippi. But we're interviewing. Again, we were before our time, way before our time.
Anybody going to tell me that that's?
I want to say something. One other thing. In my one-man show, I say this. In my one-man show that Ronnie talked about earlier, I say, if I can remember this, I say, once upon a time in America, there was a young black man and a young white man who were so naive and so idealistic, they honestly believed if they could just get people to sit down and laugh together, maybe they could live together. And I go through a whole chronology of what was going on in 1969. The Jets were Super Bowl champions. Sesame Street made its debut on national television.
Cubs won the pennant?
No. They did, as a matter of fact. But I go through all the things, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid was breaking box office records. I said all those things. President Nixon vowed he'd bring the troops home from Vietnam, and he did, but it wasn't until 4 years later, until 58,300 men earned the right to have their name on a wall in Washington, D.C. But I go on and I go through the whole thing about Tim and Tom and our act and what we did, as we just did here tonight. I end it with saying from the start, once upon a time in America, there was a young black man and a young white man who were so naive and so idealistic, they honestly believed if they could just get people to sit down and laugh together, maybe they could live together. I wonder if that day will ever come again. That's the end of that story there.
Thank you all for coming. This has been great.